Hello, hello, YouTube verse. It is Mike from the Hardcover Comic coming at you. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about Captain America by Rick Remender. I am, of course, looking at one of my custom omnibuses that I had done. People have said we don't talk about Marvel often, so I figured I would talk about a Marvel title that I actually kind of got into, mostly because, so I had started reading comics along about 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. Um, and I slowly got back into it. At some point, one of my friends recommended Green Lantern Sinestro Corps War to me, and that got me back into comics. I started collecting omnibuses, and I wound up reading Uncanny X-Force. So as I show you guys, the dust jacket here is created by Ben Williams. I've mentioned him in previous videos where he's created some dust jackets for me before I started making my own. Um, really simple stuff. Just showcasing artwork. A lot of the John Romita Jr. stuff, oddly enough, even though I'm not the hugest fan of his art, but I did think his one-page splashes were pretty great. There's a look at the spine for you. Pretty nice classic Marvel style. The Marvel custom bus bit at the top. Of course, just a little description here at the back, and it collects Captain America number 1 through 25, the 2012 through 2014 series. And like I said, this was a book, I'd read Uncanny X-Force and Rick Remender's name stood out to me. And as I was getting into collecting floppy issues, this Captain America book came out. So I had this again custom bound in a buckram bind. I got the blue color with the gold font. I love it. But anyway, this was a title that I started reading with some other Marvel books at the time, Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor by Jason Aaron, a few titles out of the Marvel Now series. But so I love this because I used the floppy issues, like I said. I was collecting it month to month, so I had those to do. While I love using trade paperbacks, it's great to see the ads and sort of takes you back to what you were reading at the time, and it reminds you of where you were in your life at that point. I mean, we're talking about almost 7 years ago at this point, right? So it's uh, it holds a dear place in my heart because of that, and I've read it a few times at this point. I love seeing the artwork for the other series that this book got me excited for when I would see those ads back in the day. But anyway, as to the storyline itself, this Captain America by Rick Remender, as you can see, John Romita Jr. artwork. He does about the first 12 issues where Rick Remender does this Dimension Z sort of thing, where essentially Arnim Zola, one of Captain America's longtime enemies, has created his own dimension, his own little world. And in his own world, he's created his own mutants. He's trying to create people. And he's trying to just basically, he's got this plan to get back at Captain America, as all villains do. And essentially, he creates this little universe for himself. And we see some backstory on Arnim Zola. We see some backstory on Steve Rogers, of course, him growing up as a youth, a poor youth. His mother's sick. His father's an alcoholic who can't keep up a job. And, you see Steve sort of as a kid struggling to find his manhood, and his mom showing him the way, how to be a proper man, how to not let tough times break you. And we see that sort of sprinkled in between, the current storyline where Captain America's stuck in this dimension. And, as he's escaping Arnim Zola at the start, he actually takes a little baby with him who winds up being his son Ian that he raises. And we find out that Arnim Zola is trying to plant this sort of living virus within Steve. We can see it here on this page. He injects something in his chest, and it turns out that it's this Arnim Zola virus that he's trying to manipulate Steve Rogers with. And like I mentioned, Steve took this child. Arnim Zola also created a daughter here, Jet Black, who becomes a part of Rick Remender's run. I don't know what's happened to her. It's been so long. But there's some decent artwork by John Romita Jr. I don't think this camera's going to focus. It's pretty crappy. Sorry, guys. I've had to get a new phone, and it's like a super cheap phone that I'm using to record this with. I got to change the format of these videos for that reason. But, there's some decent John Romita Jr. artwork in here, and I'm not the biggest fan of him. Granted, there are some really bad panels at the same time. For the most part, I don't think it's great artwork, but I enjoy some of these one-page spreads he does, that's for sure. It's a very action-oriented run. And you know, there's a great Arnim Zola page here. As you can see, Arnim Zola's got a cool little form that he's taken on here, and it's a very interesting concept. And you know, after this story again, it's about 12 issues, takes I think like 10 years worth of time, this storyline. And essentially, by the end of it all, we see a lot of things change. We get out of John Romita Jr.'s artwork. We start to see some Carlos Pacheco artwork. If you're not familiar with him, I believe he did Avengers with Jonathan Hickman recently, among other titles. He's done a bunch of work. But we see this Nuke storyline, as Nuke is being basically told by some general in his ear that he needs to go to this country, show them America doesn't take prisoners. But he's really being manipulated by another character called the Iron Nail. You get a little background on him as well, what's going on with him, why he is the way he is. You see Winter Soldier, you get to see Nick Fury get involved as well. And of course, you have Cap taking down Nuke while all this is happening, while they're basically preparing the remainder of Rick Remender's run. Nice little play on words there. I'm sorry, I just had to. But yeah, we see the Iron Nail again. Get some background history on him. He's an interesting character. We do also get to see Jet sort of play around in the world by herself and explore the world around her, and sort of find out more about Arnim Zola, about Red Skull. And then, of course, we get into a new villain that I believe Rick Remender and Nick Klein here created, because Nick Klein takes over the artwork, Dr. Mind Bubble, who essentially creates these bubbles that either brainwash you, or they throw you into some psychedelic drug trip. You're in a different universe. It takes your brain somewhere else, right? It takes over your mind, obviously, with a bubble. And he gets involved with the Iron Nail, and the whole storyline from the Nuke story basically was getting built up, comes to fruition here. So amazing artwork. I just love looking at the artwork by Nick Klein. He's I believe he is the one doing Thor with Donny Cates right now. Very talented. He's come a long way as well, as you can see here. But this was a very, very solid run. Again, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was getting into single comics at the time. I loved Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force. And while, of course, his Captain America run's great, it doesn't live up to that Uncanny X-Force power. I mean, that was just something special. But we see Jet Black again, like I said. We see her doing her own thing on the side. We see other characters in the Marvel Universe get a little more involved with the series at this point. As you may have noticed, you get a good amount of Sam Wilson in here, as well as the Falcon. He's sort of the grounding for Steve. We see the Dimension Zola. We see the Zola crew come back. They start exacting their revenge on Steve. And this is, of course, the timeline where Steve Rogers becomes an old man as well, right? But what's fascinating about all of this is, you know, Rick Remender he's a guy who likes to do a lot of inner monologue with his characters. Oh, I got the Wolverine #1 here. This was the Paul Cornell series with Ryan Stegman. And I think before that he did a run with Paul Davis as well. I remember collecting those as well. They were not anywhere near as exciting. Within one Captain America run, you had 2 reboots of Wolverine. But like I said, you get some Sam Wilson, you get some Nuke in there, and you get to see. Oh, let's take a look at the binding real quick. So it's been about 5 years I've had this book, and you know it's still holding up tight. That DFAB binding is solid. It's great. Lehman book binding, you guys rock. But like I was saying, I'm sorry guys, I jump all over the place. You already know this by now. Rick Remender likes to do the inner monologue stuff, and we get to see Cap struggle as a character, right? He's kind of like Superman in that he stands for truth, justice, and the American way, or however you want to say it, whatever adjectives you want to throw at it, liberty, all that jazz. But Captain America is obviously more human than Superman with the super soldier serum, and we get to see him struggle a lot with his decisions while really staying firm with what he believes in, even though it may not be the right thing to believe in. But I really enjoyed this run a lot. It was a lot of fun. I'm surprised we haven't seen an omnibus for it, considering almost all the other stuff that Rick Remender has done has gone in omnibus. But I am very curious to know what you guys think of this run, if you enjoyed it. Found a cool little splash page here to end things off on. But it was a very fun run, a lot of different directions the book took, a lot of different themes and storylines. I enjoyed it for what it was. I really did. Hopefully, like I said, we do get to see some oversized hardcover formatting for this. Got some pretty cool artists on it, pretty big talent. But what did you guys think of the series? Have you read it? Are you interested in it? If you do end up reading it someday, return to this video. Let me know what you think. I'm sorry, guys, that I've rambled on so much for these videos now. They used to be 5 minutes, now they're 10. I just get so excited, I get so excited. But I'm very grateful that you guys tuned in. It's always fun to talk comics. This was Mike from the Hardcover Comic. As always, you stay classy, internet.